Okay, so we've got our inbox filled up with some items to process, and we've also organized our system here in Todoist to put those items somewhere where they belong. So now we can take a look at actually processing items from the inbox into our system and, in other words, assign meaning to them so that we know what they are and can action on them appropriately. Let's take a look at this item, for example. If you remember in one of the earlier videos, we sent ourselves an email to show how we can capture those emails into our Todoist inbox using the Gmail add-on, using the Gmail integration. This item is still living here, and it's going to link to that email. When we click it, it's going to show up as a web page that we can read. So that's what I want to roll with here. Let's pretend that this email here is actually a newsletter that we've subscribed to and that we want to read. All I've done here for sake of demonstration is change the title of the task, which you can do here. You can also add a description if you like. So the first thing we'll want to think about when processing an item from the inbox is, which list does this need to end up in? Let's imagine that we only want to read this newsletter as is, and there's no additional task required for any outcome we may want to achieve with that. We just want to read it. So here's what we do. We click on it, and now as you can see, it's moved from the inbox. I can also show you by here demonstrating that the inbox has one item less. And now we moved it to the standalone items list. Now let's also imagine that this is a next action. In other words, it's an action that we can perform starting now. So what we do there is actually associate a label with this task, which we created earlier on. So here we just select the next tag, and maybe this is something we estimate will take us 10 minutes to read. So there we go. We add the 10-minute label, which it now has both of these associated with them. And there we go. Under the standalone items list, we have one item to read, which is the newsletter. It's the next action that we estimate will take us 10 minutes. So from now on, we can also sort it by associating a priority with it. If that's something we want to do, we can also associate a due date with it. So in that case, we would have a date here. The fact that it has the next label means we can start now. The fact that it has a date means that's the latest time it should be performed at. But the reverse is also an option. So what if this item, this task, for any reason, cannot be started until a certain point in time? What we would want to do then is actually remove the next label and add a date to it. Let's say we can only start this task tomorrow, and then we will see it tomorrow. From that moment on, we can add the next label, and we could then also remove the date, maybe add a deadline if it has one. But this will enable us to really focus on next actions only. Now let's try this again, but do it a bit more quickly because, I want you to feel comfortable with doing this at a large scale, day in, day out, because in the end, that's what it's designed to do for you. So let's take this fake item in the inbox here. What you can also do is use hotkeys. So the @ symbol allows you to quickly boot up a list of labels. And so let's imagine this is also a next action. That is also a standalone item. Now, for labels, you use @. For lists, though, you use hashtag. So here I press that button and I can select any of these lists that we've created before. So in this case, it's another standalone item. But then maybe it takes us 20 minutes. So this time we use the demarcation less than, because we assume it will take 20 or 15 minutes or less in this case, for example. We type that, we press enter, and it's done. We press save. And that's how you can really quickly move things out of the inbox into the appropriate list. As you can see now, we have 2 items in the standalone items list. Now this is nice and all. If we press next, we can see a list of every task that has the next label associated with it. So imagine that there was another item in another list, in another project, that would also show up here as a next action, which is great. We can see what do we have to do and how much time will that take us. So if that's how you prefer to operate, then here you go. This is all you need. But I want to take this one step further, or maybe even a couple steps further. If you're a GTDer, you're already aware of this, but what we want to do is actually differentiate the various tasks in front of us by the context they are to be performed from. Reading a newsletter, for example, is a completely different task from cleaning your kitchen. You can read that newsletter anywhere where your phone is, for example, or your other reading device, but you can only clean your kitchen while you're in your kitchen. You cannot do that while you're on the road, which you could do with the newsletter, right? So the list as it is here is a bit incomplete. It's not really suited to be as intuitive as it could be. So what we'll want to do here is actually add a new category of labels to our system, which are highly individualized. We all have our own unique contexts. And so you will need to do some thinking, what are my contexts and where do I usually, work from, so to speak. For sake of demonstration though, let's add 2 contexts here for now and associate both of these tasks with a different one. The first one we're going to want to create is a read context because the newsletter is an example of something we want to read, and that's an activity on its own. So what I'm doing here is add a specific symbol here for a reason. Just like I did with the time, this allows me when I type it, when I'm quickly processing things, to easily get an overview of every context, because every context will have this symbol in front of it, as you will see in just a moment. I'm also going to color code it for easier visibility. And now let's say the other context is home, something I can do at home. Same story. There we go. Now, again, if I click on each label individually, I can see any task associated with that. But these tasks, we haven't even given a context yet. So now we can actually go to the label section and see that these are now also available. So for the newsletter, we're going to add the read context. I add it, and as you can see now, it has a nice blue label associated with it as well. And let's imagine that this task, whatever it means, we can perform it from home. So now we've added an extra dimension of processing to our items, which again, we can also do from the inbox, of course. So let's take the last item here. This is the website that we saved. Let's say we also want to read that. So all we want to do is use next, read. Let's say we think it takes about 10 minutes. And it's a standalone item. There we go. Save. And now we've successfully emptied our inbox. So good job. And now we can select any individual context and see what are the items that we can perform from that context. There's just one more problem though. And to illustrate what that problem is, if we were to only select one label and call it a day, is by creating our first complete project. So we're going to use the sequential project template here and turn it into an actual multi-step outcome. So let's say, for example, we have a weekend trip scheduled with the family, but we don't have a car. So what we want to do is get a car for the weekend, right? That's the outcome that we're looking for here. So what could a few actions be in the first phase? Let's call it the preparation phase. So you can change the name of the board into preparation. And the first action we could say is look for or find car rental options in the neighborhood. So this is the first phase, which means it's a next action. It doesn't depend on anything else. We can start right away. We haven't done this before, so let's say this takes a bit more time for us and calculate in 30 minutes. What context does this task have? We have so far created a read and a home context. I think we can create a new context here, and let's call it the Google context. It's an activity that we perform so often. Let's just make a list for everything we want to Google. So what I did here, by typing it as if it was an existing label, to do is to ask me, hey, do you want to create this? And the answer is yes, I do. So I just click and Right away, there it is. And the association with the project is already there, so we don't have to change that. So we have a next action, 30 minutes, while we are Googling stuff. Great. That's the first action. Now, this is a sort of parallel phase within the sequential project, if that makes sense. I know I'm using big words here, but the point is we can take multiple steps to prepare, maybe try different ways to get a car for the weekend at the same time, get those things started at the same time. Because maybe we have a friend, let's call him Bob, and maybe we want to call our friend Bob, ask to rent or borrow his car. So again, next action, what would the context be? I would argue it's a phone context. So you could make a phone context or a calls context, calls to make. So that's what we're going to do here. Let's estimate 10 minutes for this. And we save that as well. Now let's say that we are only going to fixate on these two ways to get a car. Either we're going to pay for it or we're going to use our friend Bob to borrow his car. Now, we've defined the first phase, we've added the next action. Anything that comes after isn't a next action yet, but we can still define it. For example, let's say that Bob's car isn't available. So what would the next step then be? It would be to, for example, reserve or rent a car from rental, however that happens. Let's say we can do that online. So that would be an action we can perform from maybe our laptop or our computer. Let's make it computer. And let's say, putting in the payment details, let's say it takes us 15 minutes to do that. And I'm saving it already because it's not a next action. It depends on the first phase being complete, right? That's how it works. Phase 3 could then be maybe pick up the car from the rental. And this is something you obviously do on the road, so maybe we can use an errands context for this. And depending on how far away it is, let's play it safe and estimate 30 minutes for that action to be completed. We can delete this placeholder item. And then the last action would be, after our weekend is over, to return car to rental. And again, this is errand to perform. And let's also estimate 30 minutes for that for now. Right? So we have a preparation phase. Then we have, let's call it reservation, reserving the car, pick up. Now, obviously, this is a bit redundant because every phase has just one action associated with it anyways. But I do want you to get into the habit of naming your boards, your phases as well, especially for those that have multiple actions, to kind of show what kind of sub-outcome are we going for here. So as you can see, we now have various new contexts that we want to color code because they are all contexts. So we're going to all give them the blue color, just like the other ones. Now, this takes some time, but this is just an initial setup, remember? So you're not going to do this every single day, week, month, or even year once you've set up your system. This is an initial setup. So here's where the problem that I alluded to at the beginning comes up. If we want to see only next actions from selecting a certain context, a certain label, then clicking the label on its own will not suffice. As you can see here, we have an action that has the context already associated with it because we prepared the project, so we defined everything, but it's just not time for that action to take place yet. So how do we get around that? How do we work from context whilst preserving the list that we see to only have next actions? That's where filters come into play, and that's the last of the big three taxonomies that Todoist has to offer, and it's really going to save our butts here. So just to give you an example of how that would work, what we'll want to do is set up a filter that shows next actions from home, for example. First, you can give it a name. So this could be just home. And then we need to define the filter query. This is where some sort of programming almost comes into play. You need to tell Todoist exactly what we're filtering for here. In this case, it's the presence of two labels at the same time, which is next and home. So that's how we do it. We define it as a label using the @ symbol. And we can give it a color if we want. Give it any color. Let's do, I don't know, orange. Why not? And press add. And now you can see that the task that we had initially under the home label can also be reached via the home filter because it's a next action. And to show you how powerful this is, let's quickly create a fake task that is quote unquote sequential. So let's go to our sequential project here. Something from home, and it takes 5 minutes. Now, if I navigate to home, you can see the problem. I can see both next actions as well as actions that aren't available to us right now. However, if we use the filter home, we can only see the next actions. And this is where the magic happens. This is where I can really start to work from context using filters as combinations of these labels that we've set up previously. So now that we've created our filters, it's time to polish it all up and make it really pretty and fun to use, which is a really important and often overlooked ingredient when it comes to sustainable personal productivity. And what I recommend you do is also add emojis to the title here as well, so you just have some more easy visual recognition of what the context is. But I also recommend you to actually use Todoist's favorites functionality. Now, for any type of list, label, or filter, you can go to the right-hand side, select More Actions, and press Add to Favorites. My recommendation is that you only do this for the contexts, which I've set up here in more detail. And I've already added them to my favorites. Now, the big advantage here is that they show up at the top, which just allows you to more intuitively navigate there and see what is it that I can or have to do from that particular context. So now the system is really starting to come together nicely, and it's all based on some automation and proper processing of items from our inbox into whatever place they have to end up in, and a combination of labels. Now, the only limit when it comes to filters is actually your imagination. So what I haven't done here is be more selective and granular based on time, for example. In my personal experience, it's enough for me to just see at a glance what is the estimated time and then pick an action from the context, knowing the time I've left available. But if that wouldn't work for you, you could create additional filters to, for example, separate reading actions that take 10 minutes from those that take 20 or 30 or whatever other amount of minutes. And so it's really up to you how you organize it. But organizing it in the first place is really the key to success when it comes to long-term sustainable use of a task manager like this, if you choose to work from context, which I do recommend. Well, congrats. You've made it to the end of the most difficult and also the longest lesson of this entire course. So I can imagine you may need a breather right now. So take some time to continue playing with your system, getting a good feel for how these filters that we've set up work, because they're there, while they look complex, to actually make everything much more easy down the road. Just like an automatic car is much more comfortable to drive, but it has a lot more complicated engineering behind it in the back end to actually make it work for you that way. That's kind of how to see this. So if you still feel uncomfortable with anything, just keep practicing or ask your questions in the comments below. And if you're ready to move on, click ahead to move on to the next video.